Hi, I'm Caleb, part of the Narrate team. Thanks for listening to the Narrate podcast. This week is a treat as we have Jenny Buscher start a conversation about the heavy topic of depression and suicide. We've all been affected by depression and suicide in some fashion, so this week we tackle it head on. Jenny is a great friend of Narrate and also an expert in mental health.
So I have to tell you that I had a dream last night that during that set of songs that my mic was going to be on, and that then this place would find out that I was tone deaf and totally clear out, which I decided is my contingency plan for the next service in case this doesn't go well. But so I'm really excited to be here, you guys. I have the world's best job. I'm a nurse manager at Buscher Children's Hospital, and I get to be a part of the most fantastic team of nurses and psychiatrists and therapists around. They are the best. We work with kids ages 3 to 18. Specifically, my unit, we serve the younger adolescents, so kids age 11 to 14. We admit kids who are really struggling and navigating through some really rocky waters of anxiety, depression, aggression, PTSD, and psychosis. A lot of our kids come to us and they're really aggressive. A lot of our kids come to us after just making a serious suicide attempt. So we have had kids that we admit who have just tried to burn themselves to death, who have tried to stab themselves to death, shoot themselves to death, hang themselves. And it's really scary for them. And it's a huge honor to be a part of that process, and I just am really excited to share that with you because this is a conversation we don't want to have, right? I feel like no one came to church this morning to talk about suicide, so we locked the doors so you can't get out, and again, like I said, this is something I just love to talk about. So much so, I find it really ironic. I spend a lot of my day working with kids and teaching them social skills about better ways to manage their emotions and better ways to express themselves. And my husband, James, he calls himself my own personal social skills coach. Apparently, I can be awkward sometimes. And this is something, I want to share something that happens to me all the time. And no matter how many times James says, stop it, I keep doing it. So we'll be out running errands, right? Saturday. We see people maybe that I graduated with from college that I haven't seen in a really long time. And we do that whole girl like, hello, how are you? We give each other hugs. We stand in a circle in Target. And we're only allowed to share like great things about our lives, right? So people are like, oh yeah, Jen, it's awesome. I just had my second baby. She's great. She's sleeping through the night. My life is perfect. And then someone else might say, yeah, I'm done with my residency. I'm going into my surgical residency. This is amazing. And then it comes to me. And I see James, and he's behind this circle of women, and he's like, don't do it. And in my head, I'm like, okay, I probably shouldn't. I'm not going to do it. Okay, did you guys know that we had another Helena suicide this week? Another teenager completed suicide, and these numbers are just going up and up and up and up, and I don't know what to do. And people are like, oh. You know, they're taking a step back. James is twitching behind them. And no matter what, I can't help sharing these stories because I love these kids just so much. And whenever I talk to groups of people about this, my kids will often find out and they're kind of like, Jen, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? And they really want me to share their stories. So I asked them, a couple of them, if they wouldn't mind telling us why they tried to complete suicide. So I have a couple stories for you. The first one is from a 9-year-old little boy, an incredibly resilient little boy. This is his drawing. He says, staying alive hurts more than trying to kill myself because kids laugh at me and they call me names. Now, this little boy tried to shoot himself. So he was in neurosurgery for quite a while. He came out with thank goodness, some minor impairments. He's just beyond resilient. This is a little boy who was highly, highly traumatized. When he was younger, before Department of Family Services stepped in, his parents used duct tape as a babysitter. So they taped him to the wall, and he would be there for hours while his parents were out. This next picture is from a beautiful 14-year-old girl. You can't quite see it, but she wrote, "I'm alone and I'm sad." And this beautiful girl was also very traumatized. And she tried to stab herself to death. And she, at the age of 8, her mother started injecting her with heroin. And then subsequently started to prostitute her to pay for that heroin. She had some really bad foster home placements, and she came to us, and she's resilient, right? She's out there. She's doing great. I have another one for you. A 17-year-old boy, he thought that drawing a picture would be stupid. So I wanted to share his note with you. And he said, I just can't keep up with all of this. It's just not worth it. And I wanted to share his story because this 17-year-old male, he tried to hang himself. He's a straight-A student, captain of multiple sports teams, awesome family, solid. And I share his story because I think that while it's definitely true that depression and anxiety and PTSD are highly correlated with childhood traumatic events, that's definitely true. It's not out of the reach from us, right? It can touch any of us. And that's why we need to have this conversation. So before I started thinking, how do I want to bring this up and where do I want to go with this discussion, I thought, I could talk about neurotransmitters in our bodies and how medications can be really, really helpful. And I can talk about, nature versus nurture. I can talk about how different religions and different cultures view suicide. But I decided no, because I think that those are all smoke screens in front of a different issue, in front of the bigger issue. Those conversations can be really helpful and really beneficial, but they keep suicide out here. And my goal is to bring it closer to us so we can engage in a conversation and bring some hope. So I want to talk about shame. Shame is a really, really important discussion to have because it's highly correlated with anxiety and depression and suicide and violence and bullying. There's a fantastic shame and vulnerability researcher. You all may have heard of her. Her name is Brene Brown, and I'm going to just plagiarize her for a few minutes here because I think what she has to say is so fantastic. So let's talk about shame, right? Shame is very, very different from guilt, but I think they get confused. So guilt is, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Guilt is actually inversely correlated with those things I just talked about, violence, bullying, anxiety, depression. It's actually highly adaptive. You're able to say, gosh, this happened. How can I fix it? And shame is, I am a mistake. I'm sorry, I am a mistake. It's taking that and it's fusing it with who you are as a being, right? And we've all felt shame. Everyone in this room. I'm a terrible parent. I'm not a good enough student. I'm a weak person. And, whenever you catch yourself saying, I'm not good enough, or who do I think I am doing this? That's shame talking. And this is a really, really big hurdle that we have to get over to have the conversation to discuss what is, in my opinion, a public health crisis, which is suicide, right? And so, I recognize that addressing shame, it's not something that we can do just right now, right? Some of you may be thinking, I don't feel that. I've never felt that. My guess is that you're in denial about it then. And if you're not in denial about it, you're a sociopath. So I would just choose to agree, right, that you're in denial about it, right? And that's okay, and that's fine. But it's something that we've got to get over, right? It's something that we have to discuss. So, and the reason that I say that shame is this barrier in front of a bigger discussion is because the number one protective factor against suicide is authentic relationship, right? And shame gets in the way of that. So let's talk about that for a second. How does shame get in the way of that? Well, let's think about it. Maybe you're not doing so hot. Maybe you're depressed and you want to tell your best friend that you're depressed. Maybe you're suicidal. Well, the first thing that usually comes into people's minds is, I'm not going to do that. If I admit that, that means I'm a weak person. So no, I'm not going there. Done. right? That's shame talking. Let's say one of your kids comes and talks to you and they say, Mom, Dad, I'm feeling suicidal. I want to kill myself. I get bullied at school. I'm not doing well. The first thing that usually enters parents' minds, in my experience with the parents that I've talked to, is, what did I do? I am a terrible parent. What did I do? I mean, she is a product of me, and she's hurting, and that's my fault, right? And right there, that gets in the way of the conversation because we don't want to have it, right? We want to keep it out here. We don't want to bring it in here. So, and again, I recognize that this is something that might take like weeks or months to talk out with a spouse, with a friend, with a therapist, but it's something that we have to do in order to have this conversation. So I want to share some statistics with you to let you know why I think this is a public health crisis. And before I do, last year I had a teacher in Butte contact me, and she said, "Hey, Jen, I really want you to talk to my fifth graders about suicide. As you may know, we just had 2 high school students complete suicide, and no one wants to talk about it. So can you please come?" And then I get really excited. "Yeah, sure, I'm there." And she goes, "Okay, great. This is awesome. So a few things. I don't want you to mention the word suicide, and I don't want you to say depression or anxiety." And I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be tough, right? Because people have this misconception that suicide, saying it, right, increases the number of suicide attempts. So a couple things just to kind of clear that out of the way. It really depends how the media talks about suicide. Okay, so if they show a glamorous suicide and they don't include ways to get help in that media coverage, we might see an increase in suicides. Okay, but if we talk about it in a productive way with ways to get help, we see a decrease, a huge decrease actually. And I will tell you that all the kids that I've talked to, they say, "Jen, the idea was in my head way before anyone even asked. It was in my head for months. So the idea is there." Okay, so that's the important thing to know. So some national data. For the first time, suicide has surpassed car accidents as the number 1 injury-related death in America. That's pretty huge. And just to flesh that out for you guys, that means that every 12.8 minutes, and this was in 2013, someone completed suicide. So that means sitting here today, 4 people will complete suicide. I got this data, by the way, from Carl Roston, who is our state suicide prevention coordinator. He's awesome, and the data lags behind a little bit because for collection reasons and all that. But this is the most up to date he had for me. So for every person that completes suicide, there are actually 6 survivors. Right? So that means that there are 6 people who tried to complete suicide. Those are the people that we see in the ER. Those are the people that we get at Showed Air. Right? So if my math serves me correct, that's 24 people during this service that will try to complete suicide. So if that's not convincing enough, and if you're still sitting out there and you're thinking, "No, but you know what? She works with kids. This has got to be like a thing that just touches kids." It's not. Okay, so suicide rates have been the highest for those ages 45 to 64 years old. Right, so that's not kids. That's not the population I work with. We move down in age. We move down to college students. 1 in 12 college students has had a suicide plan. A plan that would be successful to end their life. That's pretty huge. And then we know that in the last several decades, suicide has increased 60% for kids who are age 5 to 14. When I was talking to Carl about this, he noted that, in previous years, we've seen suicide be in this category of ages 5 to 14. We've been seeing the rates that are highest among the 14 and 13-year-olds, okay, and it's creeping down. So now it's in the younger kids. It's in the 9-year-olds, you guys. These are 9-year-olds who have access to lethal means to end their life. And so I hope you can see why this is so important to have this discussion. Which just reminds me, I shared that story about that 9-year-old little boy by a gun lock. It's really amazing how many people don't lock up their guns. We had a little boy who he went on we call them passes. He went on a pass to go visit his family. He tried to kill himself, and his parents took him to a shooting range. So that doesn't really make sense. And then at home, the guns were still unlocked. So buy a gun lock, because you never know, right? And if you don't have one, or if you want one, I will get you one. So that's definitely a rabbit hole, but I wanted to say it anyway. Let's talk about the impact on Montana. Montanans are killing themselves at a rate higher than any other state in the country. And this is constant, right? We're always in the top 3. Our partners are Alaska and Wyoming. Okay, so there are several reasons why this can be. Just to map them out really quick, we've got, we don't have a lot of services. A lot of my kids that I discharge home, they don't have a psychiatrist for 120 miles. They're not going to drive 120 miles to get psychiatric care. They might not have therapists. A lot of our kids in the school district, we try to discharge them into CSCT programs to get them some help and some counseling, and they're full. And I don't say that to blame or shame the school district by any means. I'm just saying that we don't have enough services. We have a funny attitude in Montana. So I grew up in Chicago, and I think it was by 8 years old that every friend I knew, we had therapists. Okay. It was just oh yeah, I'm going to soccer and then therapy. But here we're people want to drive in different cars to therapy because they don't want to be seen. People are terrified of it. We have this no, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get going. Depression doesn't exist. It's fine. Right? So we have this attitude. We also have a lot of guns in this state, right? And we see kids so often that are trying to shoot themselves to death. So there's a lot of reasons, but I think, again, we've got to address it. We've got to keep the conversation close to us and not out here, right? So I want to tell you another story about a guy named Kevin Hines. So some of you may have heard this story, but I think it's pretty incredible. Kevin Hines was a resident of San Francisco. He was 19 years old, and he'd been struggling with bipolar disorder for several years. Bipolar disorder, it's just like you're in this whirlwind of emotions and you just can't get out, right? You have these highs that aren't actually feel-good highs. They're the highs that make you make impulsive, terrible decisions. And then you have these lows, right? So Kevin Hines has been dealing with this for years. He woke up one day and he said, today, I'm gonna kill myself. So he decided he was gonna jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is an attempt that thousands of people have made since the Golden Gate Bridge was made, and less than 2% of people have survived this. But he says to himself, okay, I'm gonna do this. Unless someone says, what's up, Kevin? What's going on? You don't seem like you're doing okay. No matter if it's a friend, if it's a stranger, he was going to spill it all. So he gets on the bus, and no one asks him. He's pacing the bridge of the Golden Gate for 40 minutes. No one asks him. And then finally, this tall woman comes up to him, right? And it's kind of yeah, this is it. She's a foreigner. She goes, can you take my picture? So he does. He took her picture and then jumped. And he said in that moment that he never wanted to live so badly in his life. He just wanted someone to ask. So he hit the water. He shattered his spine. He tells people that he never, he just wanted to make it to the top. And he did, and he survived. And he is a huge advocate today for suicide, and he tells his story to hundreds and thousands of folks. And I can't help but think of a story that we've all heard, I'm sure, from Bible camps past, the Good Samaritan. So I'm going to go a little rogue and read a little bit more that's on this slide, but I want to turn to Luke chapter 10. So to give you guys some context of this, what's going on is Jesus is asked what it means to be a good neighbor, right? So he tells this parable. He says, there once was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, they beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He empathized with him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill, and I'll pay you back. What do you think, says Jesus? Which of the 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly. The religion scholar responded. Jesus said, go and do the same. Right? So we've heard that before. And Jesus does empower us to be good neighbors. And I think that's something that's huge for Narrate. We strive to be good neighbors in our community. It's just, I can't help but wonder, what if the passerbyers on that bridge, what if they didn't stop and ask because they didn't know how? What if that Levite, man, what if he said, I'm not stopping, I'm not a medic, whatever, someone else is going to come by, right? What if? What if shame is poking its head into the conversation and saying, what do you think you're doing? Like, why would you ask someone if you're suicidal? If they're suicidal, you're a total stranger. That's going to make them uncomfortable. Hello, something we avoid at all costs. Just curious about it. And the reason I'm so interested is because a few months ago, I talked with some awesome middle schoolers from Narrate, and I asked them, hey guys, how many of you have wanted to ask a peer at your school if they were suicidal, but you didn't because you didn't know how? And I was really, really, really surprised to learn that they all felt that way. Everyone raised their hand in that room. The adults in that room raised their hand, right? I mean, it's scary. It's uncomfortable to say, are you thinking of killing yourself? And I ask kids that every day, and sometimes I still find that it's uncomfortable. But I just wonder if we need the tools to equip ourselves to open the conversation. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about signs of suicide, what it means, what certain signs mean, and how to ask people if they're suicidal. Okay, so some of the most common signs that we see are just general changes in people's appearance, right? Maybe hygiene is not happening these days. Someone's getting a little smelly, not changing their clothes. That's a sign of depression. Maybe someone's talking about feeling hopeless, right? Maybe your son or daughter is saying, I'm really getting bullied in school. I don't like going to school. Maybe they're refusing to go to school. Something else that's a common sign is a sudden peak in energy. So, common misconception, people think that the most suicides happen in the winter around the holidays. It's actually false. The most homicides happen around the holidays, but the most suicides happen in the spring when people get this sudden jolt of energy, right? We all know what the sun does. We get this energy back. And a lot of times people think, oh my goodness, I'm glad that person finally has energy back. But sometimes that just means that individual has made the choice and feels really great about that choice and finally feels like this burden has lifted. Like, you know what? I've been struggling with this. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to kill myself. So that's another really common sign that we see in the kids in Showed Air. So what do you do if you're seeing these signs? As uncomfortable as it is, you just have to ask, hey, I've noticed that you've been really worried about being bullied at school. Are you thinking of killing yourself? And that's uncomfortable. But the alternatives are not effective. Not talking about it, not effective. The most common way that kids tell me they're asked about suicide is someone will say to them, hey, you're not thinking about doing something stupid like committing suicide, right? And a little girl told me that in my office this week, and she goes, and you know what? I said I was being stupid. And she was really mad at this person who said, you're not being stupid, right? Right. So we just have to ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? Okay. Now, what if someone says yes? So really important to stay with them, keep them safe, listen non-judgmentally, and empathize, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then ask them, hey, can I get you some help? I made some cards with some excellent resources. They're on the heat registers that just kind of summarize that. And if you guys would take one, that would be great because, whether you're feeling this way yourself or whether you're in a position to ever talk to someone about it, it's good to have on hand. The middle school students also asked me, hey, Jen, there are some kids in my school who just say they want to kill themselves every single day, and I'm kind of over it. And I get that. I get that that's tiring to work with an adolescent who is in this place where every day they're saying I'm suicidal, and I get that that can be exhausting. But whether or not someone is actually thinking that, you always have to take it seriously because it's a pretty maladaptive way. If you're thinking they just want attention, it's a pretty maladaptive way to ask for attention, right? So no matter what, if it's every single day, you take it seriously every single day. And like I said, it can get really exhausting, but it's something that we got to work through, and that's why we've got a community. That's why we've got each other to lean on. I think that this signs of suicide can also be really easy to deny, especially for adults. We had a gal who tried to hang herself, and for 6 months under her bed, she had 60 pills of Oxycontin, 30 feet of rope, a handgun, and knives. And her parents were thinking, we didn't see these signs. Like, she just was in her room because she's a teenager. Like, she was fine. She just doesn't talk to us because that's the way teenagers are. I also hear a lot, well, I didn't think anything was wrong. He was just drinking because work's been really stressful. Again, denial is a really helpful thing for us because we can keep suicide out here, right? We don't have to think about it. But there are always signs. That's one of the things that Carl Roston says all the time, and he investigates every single suicide that's completed in the state. There are always signs. And a lot of times we're just in denial about them. So it's really important to just be alert all the time, right? So, this leads us back to, what if we have this fear of asking? What if shame is getting in the way? And I think more often than not, shame does get in the way. But we're really lucky because there is a really powerful antidote to shame that we can destroy it. And that antidote is empathy, okay? So empathy is huge because empathy is going to drive relationship. It's going to build relationship. It's going to dissolve that shame because empathy, like I said, it's going to drive connection. Okay, it's going to allow you to have that conversation, and it's going to then eradicate that shame. So I want to be hopeful in this conversation, right? I don't want to end this on a note of, so shame and suicide, go, right? I think that suicide is really, really hopeful. I think that talking about suicide is a sign of hope. Anyone that wants to talk about it, that means they want help. Anyone that wants to have a conversation about it, that is hopeful. So I want to show y'all this video, again, from Dr. Brené Brown. She's able to explain empathy way better than I ever could. So I just want us to take a minute to watch this video. So it's not lost on me that empathy can be exhausting. 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you're going to find me in one of my therapist's office lying on the ground saying, I don't know what to do. I don't think I can do this anymore. And, we all do that. At Show Dare, we say my empathy bucket is totally empty. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to be away from this kid right now. And that's why we have community to fill that empathy bucket back up. So I know it's exhausting, and I know that it's not just like, hey, go be empathic. I get that. But something that I do just adore about this idea of empathy is that it's all over the text, right? our God is not a shaming God. Our God is a loving God, and he uses empathy too, right? And so I think that empathy is going to allow us to open up the conversation that says, you're not a bad parent. You're not a weak person. You're not unworthy. You may have made mistakes, but you're not a mistake. So I just want to pray for us really quickly. Hey, Lord, thanks for being a God who loves us enough not to shame us, for being a God who helps us break down that wall of shame to love one another through empathy. And I just pray that Narrate as a community can embrace this conversation and move forward with the courage to address and identify what's going on in our community. Amen.
Amen. Wow. So what strikes me is there's no sense in trying to get the last word because there's lots of great ones right there. So thank you so much, Jenny. And, part of who we are is a place that wants to step into the mess. And so my hope is that this helps you. I think that Brene Brown video, that's a YouTube thing, right?
It is,
They can get that?
Yeah,
so
totally.
You could watch it for entertainment or you could watch it for education, both of which it accomplishes. Those cards you said are on the heat registers.
You bet.
So you can grab those. Jenny and her husband are part of this community, so you can interact with them as you see them if you need to. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so crazy, but hopefully helpful stuff as we just kind of try to... I think what I'm encouraged by and what came out from my conversation with Jenny was that at the end of the day, what matters is connection and relationship. And it's funny how that's nothing new.
Exactly.
And yet it's really all that matters.
Yep.
Wow. So
absolutely.
Thanks.
You bet.
Let me tell Jenny thank you for that. Well, I guess I do have one other question. Because you talked there, we had this conversation, and I think you had a good visual of the whole reality of therapy and medication. Could you step on that for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely this tension between taking medication and, using therapy. And what we know is that medication and therapy combined are the most successful, right? That's where you're going to get the most success. And I think that there's this idea that people want to not take medication because they want to fight through it. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're thinking, well, if I don't take this medication, or if I take this medication, it's going to make things easier for me, and I'm not going to learn from these challenging experiences that I do when I'm so anxious. But what I really find is that medication allows that clarity to work through those conversations, right? And so it's a more productive way. And people, our kids aren't on medication for forever. We say, stay on this for a year and then let's reevaluate. And people get off of medication. It's a helpful tool to help you process in therapy.
Yeah.
So.
And the therapist that we recommend a lot of people to, and we talked about this, she would say the reverse is also often true, that people will just do, and we were talking about, people will just do the medication and not do the work part.
Yeah, not
helpful. That too isn't. So almost this intersection. Yeah. So there you go. Sure love you guys and love the opportunity to be real and talk about life and how that intersects with God and who he is, and just love that. It's such a good reminder that the difference between shame and guilt. So thank you for that. Yeah. Sure love you guys. Have a great week.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.